Welcome to Breaking Ceilings, Breaking Ground, the podcast celebrating the women redefining real estate development. I'm Molly McCabe, and alongside my co-host Jill Ferrari, we're sitting down with the developers, the visionaries, and the builders whose projects and instincts are reshaping skylines and communities. What strikes you when you talk to women in this space is how expansive their thinking is. Profit and community impact are not competing priorities. They're actually part of the same calculation. And that mindset is producing some of the most innovative development in North America right now. This is a conversation about what's being built, the deals, the risks, the pivots, and the wins. So let's get into it. Jill?
Today, we are honored to welcome Kristin Ryan, co-founder of barrientosRyan, an all-woman development and advisory firm in Seattle, Washington. The firm specializes in building inspired places that support Seattle's growth, and in particular, creating mixed-income housing and community spaces that integrate affordability with market-rate development. Things critical to building diverse, sustainable urban communities, especially historically underserved areas. Previously, Kristin ran West Coast operations for the Jonathan Rose companies. She is one of those rare people who thrive on figuring out how to use multi-layered public and private financing approaches to develop complex community projects. Woman after my own heart. She is also a board member and mentor at the University of Washington Runstad Department of Real Estate. But before all of this, Kristin spent several years in the nonprofit sector working on child welfare, AIDS, and human rights organizations. So it's not a big surprise that while the idea of mission-driven doesn't always resonate in commercial real estate, Kristin has always believed you can do well and do good. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We are thrilled to have you. I've known you for a long time, so I'm just delighted to have this opportunity to delve a little bit more into, kind of some of the things you're working on. And so one of the things we'd like to start with is, what are you working on? Tell us a little bit about, what are you currently building? Who are you building it for? And
so the two projects one that is just finished up and one that is about to start are probably two of, maybe they're my favorite right now because they're the most recent, but they've both been very long-standing projects, which is pretty common in the work that I do. The opportunities to bring together the various community partners to create these sort of mixed projects can take a long time. So the first one was called the Nook at Northhaven, and is an intergenerational project that is 89 units of what was originally anticipated to be privately financed workforce housing, now is a mix of private financing, government financing, and corporate financing from Amazon, that has 100 childcare center at the bottom of it, and it's on a campus with a 200-unit independent affordable senior living facility and another 45-unit assisted living facility. And so the whole idea of this is a project that's on a mega block in the north side of Seattle. And the senior living, I met the folks at the senior living community at this point 14 years ago. And so really the core, I think, of so many of my projects is the core of having developed a personal relationship with somebody and then understanding the vision of what they want to do and sort of buying into it and saying, yeah, I can help do that. Like I often say, I happen to use real estate as my toolbox, but building community is what I love to do and what I've always loved to do. And so I met Bill Doran and Darlene, who at this point has been the director of that senior living community for 35 years, I believe. She is one of the amazing women on the face of this earth, completely, super creative in terms of her approach, and really creates this amazing community there at Northhaven. And they wanted to create this camp right there, sort of in the center. She's got 200 seniors who have so much to give and lots of sort of life and interest left, and really wanted to have a comprehensive space where there were kids around and younger people around and more interaction than the programming that she could do. Just kind of, hey, we can do an outing, we can have a book club and invite other people in. So we started working to have that vision occur. And so working with a partner who I'd worked with before to do privately financed workforce housing. And when we're saying workforce, sort of meaning that really 60 to 80% area median income. So in Seattle, that's 60,000 to 80,000 for an individual. And at the end of the day, we started working on that. We bought the parcel of land in 2019. And in the challenges of financing and changing interest rates and things that occurred, just continued to kind of build on those relationships. So ultimately brought in money from Seattle's Office of Housing, brought in money from Amazon, brought in another independent private investor, and created a stack to build the project. We didn't at that time have all the money to build out the childcare, but as is often the case as well, and with this kind of level of financing, you learn that you got to go and keep going and have a lot of faith in the world that it's going to keep happening. Because if you stop to wait for everything to line up perfectly, it doesn't line up perfectly and you kind of can never get started. And everything always gets it gets more expensive, more likely than way more often gets more expensive, not less, the longer that you're trying to kind of run through that. So we ultimately pulled that together, and then pulled together in total about $6 million of grants and funding for the childcare build out, and opened the childcare just in May. So May 1st was the opening of the childcare. It is run by Refugee Women's Alliance, has 100 kids, birth to 5. So we have this really neat interactive building, which also I will say too, one of the things to remember is co-location does not necessarily mean collaboration. So just because folks are in a space next to each other doesn't necessarily mean that they coordinate and collaborate together. So we have an intergenerational work group that meets on a monthly basis with the representatives from, the person who runs programs at Northhaven Senior Living, and our property manager, and the head of the childcare, and the programs director of the childcare, that we get together to figure out what we're going to do. We've funded that position with some money so that there's actually a facilitator to help keep things moving, and the stuff that we come up with, hey, we're going to do a co-gardening program, but somebody's got to go buy the shovels and the seed and that bit. And so Gordon goes and can do that, right? There's somebody to go and implement and execute on it that's on top of everybody's day job, as it were, because I think that's really the most important lesson. This is probably the fourth co-integration kind of thing that I've done in terms of really developing this model on what does it mean to do integrated spaces where you've got co-programming. Somebody has to be funded to have that be their job, to stay on top of it. And so that's super special that that's finally open, and we've got the kids there, and we'll have a launch for it. There's a public outdoor space near it that's where the outdoor childcare play space is. And so they do that. So that's one. That one's
phenomenal.
wrapping up. And then my other fantastic project that is hopefully that we have a soil turning instead of a groundbreaking, I'll describe that in a moment, is for the Tubman Center for Health and Freedom. Again, a relationship-driven piece where I had been, somebody mentioned that I should meet Ina Abbey, the CEO of the organization, and meanwhile, Ina had been talking to several people in the community who all were saying, oh, you need to meet Kristin. And it was just one of those things, we all met each other early on, and there were all these overlaps and all this stuff that meant it was this is meant to be. Tubman started in the pandemic in 2020, founded by 6 Black Native LGBTQ leaders that were really looking at finding an alternative way to provide healthcare services to folks that have been medically marginalized, and have created an amazing protocol and are just a group of folks who know how to get stuff done. So they've only been around at this point for 6 years. We're about to start construction on a 26,000 square foot medical clinic that has $32 million of public funding available to it that has been raised because of what they are doing. And they do advocacy. Really, it is grounded out of the way that they are providing healthcare has been grounded in community conversations with 26,000 individuals who have shared what they know makes them well versus thinking about just how do I address something that's making me sick, and where that's grounded in holistic community and the systems that are making them unwell and the sort of cultural stuff. So it brings under one roof, brings together acupuncture, massage, hydrotherapy, primary care, nutritional care, herbalist medicine, movement, physical therapy, So it's really an amazing opportunity. They have a what we call the sort of the pilot site. So they have a site that they've already started doing this in called the Healing House that's serving 500 patients, and this will grow to serve 12,000 patients. They bring folks from, I think it's 9 different counties across Washington for folks that are coming to get care, because it's just a kind of care that you can't find otherwise in today's medical environment. And
Kristin,
so, yeah.
So I was just going to ask, between the two projects that you described, is there a difference in your role as developer? Are you an equity owner in both, or a fee-based developer on top? How is your role different in these projects?
Yeah, I'm essentially a fee developer in both.
Okay.
What's very common in work that I do with organizations like Tubman is going in as what in the industry we'd call an owner's rep. So I am doing third-party consultant work for the organization, but as also often happens, sort of I am their capital projects manager, right? When you're doing so many of these nonprofits, they don't have a real estate department. That's not what they do. They are a theater, they're a school, they're a health clinic, and all this, the staff in the organizations really do that. And so my role becomes, again, bringing the toolbox of the built environment to this space and helping do the translation of what do you not only the organization around the development side of it, but also the cross translation of how do you take what your vision is and how do you turn it into the space that you want in the built environment. In the Nook at Northhaven, and that is the economic model, and that is effectively a mission-based economic model that's been created with foundation funding. That's basically what we've talked about as sort of a cashback philanthropy tool, where the private investor is putting in foundation money that ultimately, when it comes back out of the project, can go back to their family foundation and then fund another generation's worth of stuff. So it's not designed, it's sort of designed to leverage the benefit of that private capital for a period of time, but not necessarily from a cash flow output perspective. So,
Great. I think your point around being sort of that their capital arm as well, you put together extraordinarily complex capital stacks, and whether that's bringing in grant funding or private capital or, debt or what have you. And I think that's a pretty unique skill set. And I think it also speaks to you how you move through taking the vision and all the disparate pieces that need to come together. And I've been really interested in watching some of the work you're doing. I mean, you describe the Nook and you say, well, we need to find somebody, we have to pay for someone who can run these groups. So I think what I hear from you is I see that there are lots of pieces and I need to be able to weave them together. Can you talk about how you look at a project, recognize that there are all these different pieces? It's nothing you're doing is slam dunk and easy. And what does that mean in terms of how do you go out into the community and identify these different components?
yeah, I think my attraction to these kind of projects and the skill set I bring to it come a lot from, in some ways, sort of my background and my history, right? I was a sociology major as an undergrad. I've always thought about people and the systems of people and what does that look like. And so to me, bringing together people is just like, what do those overlapping systems look like? And then where are our societal systems responding to those? So grant stuff is often like, well, right, who's bringing in money related to, is it a health thing? Is it a childcare thing, right? Is that out of a health system? Is that out, trying to think about the core system that is relating to that need, that person group. And then where are the funding streams? And then, I came into real estate from a business degree. And so my mind knows, the finance piece of it is core and fundamental. And I can't, while I can do both, I see the project as the aesthetic built thing and how do these things work? It only works when the capital, right? I also sort of get that it only works on the basis of these numbers. And so how do the numbers fall together? And so for me, the two are sort of very parallel, and it's just well, right. Well, what's the need that's being achieved there? When I look at even the finance sources, I think it's almost like I ascribe the personal characteristics to them. Like, what is the need that finance source has?
Yes.
What is their,
What's their
fundamental primary
problem?
purpose? What
Yeah.
is the thing that they're trying to achieve? And so it's like, oh, well, if you're talking about a lender, right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to mitigate their risk. They're trying to, they're going to have an interest rate return that's going to be, but like, that's their job. Their job is to put money
Yes.
out. And so kind of what's their personal standpoint in it? And one of
Yeah.
the things that I often counsel when I do sort of the work that I do mentoring is like, right, you gotta like put on the persona of who that person is and think about what they're asking for when you go into
Yes.
negotiation, because that's how you can kind of get to the outcome that'll work. And I think that's helped a lot, whether it be like low-income housing tax credit investors or other tax credit folks, or the relationships that I've developed with the public agencies around here, because I think what can often happen in the bureaucratic funding sources is this funny disconnect of like, oh, the money's been granted and awarded to organizations because the public has in the legislature and, appropriations have decided there's some cause that needs to be supported by public funding, childcare and healthcare and all those things. But then the bureaucratic side of the execution of them can become very rigid and not necessarily recognizing how much that rigidity can influence and upset the benefits of kind of the mission that's trying to get achieved, or add cost and add just sort of bureaucratic challenges through there. And so a lot of the work I've been successful to do is kind of say, hey, this is what we're trying to get to, right? Like, this will still mitigate the risk. Like, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure the state doesn't get sued, right? How can we talk about ensuring that the state doesn't get sued, but still not take don't tell me I have to go back and rewrite the budget appropriation for the next legislative cycle. Like, I don't have another 9 months. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right, and
I
there's a
love it.
capital part of that I don't have another 9 months too, right? You just think about timing. You mentioned timing earlier, and you just the cost of money is real, whether or not, so that bureaucracy is really a challenge. So I get it.
Yeah.
And the part about solving stakeholders' problems, I'm so glad that you said that. I talk about that when I teach, that as a developer, that is your job, to figure out how to solve multiple problems through your project and really understand what it is that those lenders are trying to achieve, and then adapt. And we recently had Fabiola Florenville on and was talking a little bit about shifting her product type based on the needs that certain stakeholders had, lenders had, and now she's in occupancy. And so it's part of our nature to adapt and pivot. Molly loves to use the words persevere and pivot, and it sounds like you have mastered both of those beautifully, which is just who we need to be as developers.
Yeah, you have to have that perseverance and patience to stop. And I think it's also, right, I think the piece that I think about a lot is, right, executing development is about doing a million minor things, right? It's like making the phone call to the person to get the permit through, to like sign the piece of paper that they need to upload the right drawing, right? Whatever, those kind of micro things. But understanding and the ability to pivot has to also do with being able to see the macro really well, like understand the system, see where it's pivoting. I think about a project that we worked on designing into the pandemic, but was around, micro housing, right? Like micro housing and and like, oh, right, how did things shift and how are they going to shift? And okay, what's going on with office right now? And how is that changing the way people work? And have a conversation with any woman in our generation. And there's been a real fundamental shift on like, where's the time balance and what do you do? And what are the benefits for having had this hybrid work environment? And then what are the challenges and how does that, like, I think there are these really fundamental shifts that are occurring beyond just the like basics of, is this 5 days of return to work working for this tech company?
Right.
And that are about kind of like, how are we reshaping the environments that we're moving into? And how do you do that in this moment of this crazy escalation of technological change, and thinking about like, how do you use and balance those things and how do they come into play? Right. And
Well, and one of the things that you talked about earlier was this role of community manager being so much broader than what we typically see in commercial real estate with a property manager whose job is to manage that facility, bring in revenue, pay bills. But we're seeing in some of the most thoughtful and sustainable developments, like Nook Northhaven and like the Kelsey in San Jose, that there is a person there whose sole job, well, they probably have multiple jobs, but one of their main priorities is really managing the community of people and being inclusive and just really driving connectivity between the residents and the rest of the community around the project. And we talked a little bit about the funding for that. It's so difficult to get long-term revenue sources to cover those positions. But I mean, there's obviously a direct connect between the attention to that, the investment in that, and the sustainability of the project. And so, any more thoughts on, how we can build that into our thinking as commercial real estate developers, that we really have to be intentional about the community management moving forward, and how you're financing that, or, any nuggets you can give us on the future of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's, as with anything, it's like you have to start building it into performance. You have to understand that it's a cost of the project. And when it's sort of embedded in the cost of the deal, it just is. And so then some of the financing can continue to roll it in, as it were. If you think about it more in like a performative supportive housing world context, the idea of like, right, we need counselors and we need substance abuse advisors and we need mental health specialists to embed and wrap around in that supportive environment, because otherwise it's just a building and there's not the support system and the network around it. And I think as we increasingly have this challenge of more people are stressed, there are more needs, there's more disconnect. Technology has made us oddly more disconnected from each other at the same time that it in theory is facilitating easier connection to everybody and anybody. That how do you regain that personal touch? And so the personal touch and the individual relationship and communication is such a part of that. When I think, like part of what I think about with built environment it's just that it is the built environment, not the virtual environment, right? So we can do a lot of stuff in a virtual environment that's really great, but the built environment has to do with tangibility. It has to do with the piece that I can touch the wall and I can touch the person that I'm interacting with in it. And so how build in that support network. Now, if you talk to somebody that is thinking about outcomes for permanent supportive housing, we know that that is going to perform better from an basic sort of economic premise if you have the wraparound services around your population base. Like, why is that any different? So really this sort of saying, like, we have the need for kind of incorporating this wraparound service is going to have a benefited outcome. It is going to turn out better. It may feel like that's 10 steps down the road. It may feel like it is not as directly tangible as like, if I have security, I won't have the break-in. If I don't have the break-in, my insurance rate. You can't tie the direct stitching as cleanly, but there's some great work that the Purpose-Built Communities has done to kind of start to document the longer term effects of really creating these networked communities in terms of overall, right, economic levels raising and overall education levels raising and those kind of pieces. And so that's really a storyline that I think it's so important as community builders to really be talking about. And it is like when I think about the future of our worlds is, what is that storyline about longevity? What's that storyline about continual, like, this is not just for the transaction. This is not just for what's happening now. It has to be about what's going to happen in the longer term and the sort of better improvement, because otherwise we're living in a pretty extractive society right now. And a lot of these deals are just pretty extractive. Like, let me get all the money I can out of tech company, out of the stock market, out of whatever right now. And it's all coming and accumulating in sort of the few. And we need to get back to, these are the ways to get back to the many and the support of the many and the pieces. And it's hard to think about because we don't know, at the same time, technology is taking jobs that could otherwise be jobs. But that to me is part of the innovation when you're thinking about it. And that's where that creative thought comes in, when you can like a community builder can really sit and go in, what's the specifics for this group? What's the specifics for this set of needs? Where are the specific jobs that these teams could get in this context? Because that's
Yes.
the knowledge, because that's super different than like, here's this statewide program that says teen employment and doesn't have that tangibility back to like, what does it take? This is that opportunity for tangible, real, like one-on-one personal understanding and results. And I think that's really where that gets. So it's telling that story of like why that's actually going to improve like how that improves performance. And there are ways to talk about
You
that,
know what I
right?
mean?
Like it
Yeah.
minimizes rollover. It increases,
Yes.
it's gonna minimize
Yep.
security risk because people are looking at, like, there are all sorts
Yes.
of little pieces that you can try to build into the more traditional storyline of, cost and risk impacts.
We've got to find ways to encourage investment in developers that are focused on
Right.
that broader, comprehensive problem solving approach and really thinking about the interconnectedness because it takes more time. It takes more effort. It's harder to do the development that you're doing. And it can be challenging to put food on the table and meet the financial requirements that you need to meet for your company when you're trying to be this type of developer, even though we know that the more projects like this we have, the better our entire economy is going to be
Right.
because of these projects. And
Mhm.
I'm sure it's challenging for you as a business owner to be thinking about these dual goals. And just so glad that you're out there doing it.
And
Well,
Jill and I talk a lot about sort of the long-term benefits of the work, the kind of work that you're doing, and the economic benefits. So to some if you
Yeah.
think about your comment about understanding everyone's needs, you're still understanding the needs of that more transactional investor because they still need to have a return. And you can then
Yeah.
talk about that over in the longer term as you look at this asset, this physical asset that you're investing in, this has better returns when you have created the opportunity for long-term stability in your tenant base. It creates better returns when you have a more sustainable product type. You're using better materials. These are all longer-term benefits to the return of the asset. So even though we can step back and go, we feel that this is the right thing to do. We feel that this benefits humanity, and we can also then have these other conversations that perhaps are more hard numbers, as they say. So I want to ask you a question because it raises some of these things you talk about raise for me things like, you know, your own experiences. So tell us a little bit about who do you take care of? Who is,
Yeah.
who's in your world? Because I think that really shapes how you approach your development, your kids, your family, your community, sort of how are you involved in these things? You talked a little bit about the Runstead Center and your mentorship. I assume that's part of that bigger community. So how does that shape how you think about place?
yeah, I think it's funny because since I have always been sort of an urban I've been very lucky to live in a lot of different cities and as an adult. So like not moving around as a child where I think you have a different perspective. And part of my perspective now having kids is recognizing also how the stages that you're at for who you're caretaking for, like totally
Yes.
drive what you look for, right? I lived in New York for years and then I went back with my toddler and I was like, I had like the playground, where are the playgrounds, right? Like I had never paid attention to where are the playgrounds, right? Lived on the Upper West Side and then went like, oh, right, there's one, I've walked by this playground 1,000 times, never sort of like embedded it in my mind until I opened my Google Maps before our trip to go again, like where, oh, right, oh, good, we're staying 3 blocks. Oh, right, there was a playground there that whole time? Like that's where I used to live. And so I think, but like now I could care less about playgrounds. Now
Right.
I have teenage kids who are super sporty. I really wish there were an indoor volleyball, program that was closer to me. And then I had to, I just sort of processed this. It's funny that being an urbanicist took me a little while, but it's one of the funky things for me about Seattle's level of single family home, sort of residential within the city still makes it feel like this weird suburban urban setting, having been in much, denser East Coast cities for a lot. But I'm like, why don't I have volleyball here? And it's like, of course we don't have volleyball here, right? Like I'm in the major urban metro, like I'm in a major urban setting. I shouldn't have necessarily large swaths of land with big parking lots and, sort of basically warehouse development, that is what you have. That's suburban development. Like that's what is available in more suburban, less dense urban spaces, which is why I've got to drive 45 minutes. And so but I'm driving the 45 minutes for maybe another year till my son gets his license. And then all of a sudden that need goes away. And what I've been thinking a lot about, because having this very intense conversation with all these other parents of sporting stuff and like, hey, let's invest our knowledge and our expertise and build it, like getting this center built, getting this thing done in our, more closer to where we are in this immediate need.
Yeah.
Is how much then that immediate need also influences where you can spend your time and resource, right? I'm like, right, I care a lot about this right now. And then I'm not going to like, oh, this is the challenge with school improvement is you care very deeply, like for the elementary school. And then your kid hits 5th grade and like, you're not reinvesting in the redevelopment of that school. And I mean, part of it becomes, I can't help myself, right? So I am like trying to think about an HVAC upgrade for my kids' middle school right now, even though my daughter will be an 8th grader next year. And like, I don't know if we'll get this thing implemented. I've said, oh, it's got to get implemented by next summer. Like we're going to get it done. You've been talking about this thing for the last 5 years. Like we're getting it done between the time that I'm going to be still involved in the school. Cause otherwise it's like, there you go. But it's that very sort of intense level of effort into these things that are influencing what's going on in your world. And how do you balance that in the longer term? Now, I think I bring it all, like you tend to bring those into whatever project then becomes a different influence. One of the things that I always have, when I got really involved with the folks at Northhaven Senior Living. My mom was a physical therapist. She worked in a lot of, she did patient care in nursing homes as a visiting nurse. So she worked for Visiting Nurse Association. So I spent a part of childhood in nursing homes, hanging out, doing the crafts. Like while she was visiting patients, I'd do the crafts. I'd have a violin lesson later and I'd practice for somebody, I'd do my practicing with one of the seniors that was in the facility. So the nature of that interaction felt totally normal. So when the Northhaven folks said, hey, let's think about this intergenerational bit, I knew that in my bones. It wasn't well, what does that mean? It's oh yeah, I lived that. I got to do that. And so all those different pieces, I think, just come and go. I think I'm always I have a really hard time saying no. So students kind of reach out and want time, or the school reaches out and says, can you do this? And it's all just a part. I mean, I think an aspect of it and an aspect of all the work is this is what I love. This is what makes me feel good. This is what makes me feel like I'm helping create change. I get very frustrated if I feel, and Molly knows this well, when I feel like I'm stuck in stasis, that's not a happy place. It's I need to be making change. I need to be improving things. I need to make stuff different, better. So I'm not very good at being content with hanging out. As much as I should probably find a little bit more of hanging out. But
I think this is a common trait amongst especially female developers. We're like sharks. We need to constantly be moving, or we cease to exist. And speaking
of
about
it like that, Joe, we need to be constantly.
I do like that.
Right?
We're
sharks.
Don't start to sleep with your eyes open or something too. It's
right? It's
always
thinking. And so not really from the predatory perspective, but just from this concept of just always moving, always changing, always shifting. We're sharks. The best quality of sharks.
Right. Maybe whales do that as well, and we could be whales.
We could be whales. And you've mentioned, your capital stacking ability, your community building ability, but we always ask our guests, what is your one superpower that you think is the most important trait that you've developed over the years as a developer?
I do think it is that ability to be to really understand systems thinking, and yet also I'll get on the phone with my architect and be well, but weren't we going to move that wall 6 inches the other way? And they're we talked about that 5 months ago. Why do you remember that it's 6 inches? And there's just I remember these details of things that I can track. I can track a lot of details in my head. That's sort of one of the things. And so I can hold them. But I also always that makes you a great project manager, not necessarily a great developer, right? So seeing the system interaction is the part that I think allows me to be the great developer is like,
Yeah.
right, how is that influence not in isolation? What are the forces? Because I think that's so much what development's about, right? Like, what are
Yes.
the cool thing with real estate, and part of why I was drawn to it was the multidisciplinary nature of it. It's not just a finance tool. It's not just a marketing thing. It's not just a, you know, a aesthetic creative task. It is marrying all those pieces together. And so the ability to understand how the systems and the ecosystems and the societal systems and our economic systems and financial stuff influence is a key to
Yeah.
what, right? Like interest rates change, like our market changes. We all know that, right? But
Yep.
also understanding and looking at those more nuanced ones, the next layer down and thinking forward.
Fantastic.
I love that. That's just such a you are so thoughtful and intentional about the way you move through the world. And I'm really inspired by that. I read a funny quote from you that says, never become too good at something you don't enjoy. And
That,
I
yeah.
think, yeah, and to your point around multidisciplinary and bringing all these pieces together, maybe talk about that and what kind of advice would you give emerging women developers? Maybe some of your students that you're speaking to at Runstead. We run into a lot of women who are doing a pivot from being an architect or a civil engineer or social work perhaps, and now want to do development. So what would you tell them?
Yeah, well, that quote I actually can't even ascribe to me because I repeat it because I think it is one of the most valuable sort of lessons learned. That was from, and I don't exactly remember who it was. It might have been Jim Chafin. It was at a ULI. Like,
Oh,
here's the old
interesting.
guard of ULI talking to a young leaders cohort at a conference, it probably would have been like the 2020 meeting. I mean, sorry, to the meeting in 2000, like way back when I was still in business school thinking about it. And they said, like, don't get too good, like because you will engender this level. Like, if you have success at doing what you're doing, you will you'll get promoted for doing that thing. And then when you like, and all of a sudden you'll be in this setting where you're doing, right, you are now doing investment banking, but you hate like you're this fabulous real estate investment banker and you hate it. But now you're making a lot of money doing it and you are in a position and it's really hard to think about how you can pivot then. And so I think
Yeah.
it's an aspect of speaking that I just have always carried forward and shared with a lot of people because I think it is a smart fit. And I think, when I look at I've a part of my experiences, but I didn't start out as a developer. I've been very lucky to be in a lot of different roles and positions. I've been an asset manager, I've been a property manager, I've helped on investment fund. Like, I have been in all these different seats, and being in different seats helps you a lot, right? Like, I think, and I
Yeah.
just was speaking to a class and saying, like, in many ways, my property management is like, I think you can't be a great developer in some ways if you have never lived the ops of what you're trying to build, because you have to understand how it's going to operate on the other end. Otherwise, it's just a set of numbers, right? Like, and as much as I say you got to know your numbers, if you can't understand how those numbers translate to people and how they
Yeah.
experience it at the end of the day,
Right.
you don't really
So true.
get why the parking number fluctuates. You don't get why you would need security or not security. So you have to kind of understand what it means. And so that's one of the core things, especially right now. There are a lot of, students in the MSRE program are coming out into a really tough environment. There are not a ton of people
Yeah.
hiring that, we're in a pretty stasis point right now, particularly in our multifamily building and obviously in office development, right? So there is a tricky place for them to come out. And I'm like, any job that you can learn in is a good job, right? Like, this is about experience. I think I've also said, like, the more deals you can get your hands on early in your career, the more exposure you get, the more you can start to
Yes.
understand the relative nature of things. And so, but you have to be curious and you have to be engaged, right? If you're going to go and participate in an AOP or a ULI, right? Like, if you're going to go become a member, you got to go become a committee member, and then you got to go
Right.
volunteer for some position within
Right.
the committee. Like, you have
Yes.
to be able to show. So we're doing this housing, I'm doing this sort of housing convening that I was thinking about the other day and laughing because I'm the one getting the emails about, like, what are the things to do. And of course, every other person who's showing up for this has basically been this kind of like open invitation to folks I know in the world that want to think about the housing crisis and show up at my investor partner's office, and like everybody else is retired right now or not working right now in like a little station, and I'm the one still like running this like doing my full-time gig, and like they're like, oh, I think next week we should talk about this. Oh, do you happen to know where this thing comes out? And I'm like,
Right.
okay, wait, what?
You're doing the agenda, you're doing all the notes, you're doing it all.
But that element of, again, this is like, how do you leverage your network? So there were, I reached out to say, before I realized I could actually have AI take my notes for me and that would actually work and I could just record and do it. Greg and I were like, we need an intern. We need somebody to like do this processing stuff, and reached out to the university and got a bunch of people responding. And then it was like, right, this doesn't have to be like one person. This is about bringing in that other layer of communication. And the pitch I gave to both the women that are going to come, work with us, because it's a very limited scope. It's like, I don't even know if we'll meet over the summer. It's sort of, 2 hours on a Friday, is like, this is an opportunity to be exposed to a bunch of people who have a ton of experience in the industry. Like, they've all been in the industry here in the city for 20 or 30 years. You've got exposure and you've got this opportunity to show them what you can do, right? Like, because you can take action and initiative in a very easy and comfortable space. And so I think that is I talk a lot too about like having the confidence just to go do that. I don't know 100% where I got it, but I've always been the person who will just jump in and go do it. Like, I've done it since I was a little kid, right? Like, I can go do that. And I just sort of step in to go do it. I'll step in to lead something or organize it or fix it. And so really trying to help embed folks that may have less confidence in doing that, of like, that is a big part of how you show all that, like, nobody knows all this talent that you have hiding inside if you can't figure out how to show it. And so how do you make sure you find the opportunities to show it to other people?
We talked about this with another interviewee, that female developers just have a super confidence. We are fearless in a lot of places. We step in, we take on new challenges, and it just is a common thread amongst us. And helps build our community of women who can understand each other and not think that we're crazy when we talk about all the things that we take on. There's comfort in that there are women out there that are just as crazy as we are. So it's
and I think to that, it's a great line. And I think that aspect of, because at times, right, I think as women in this industry, there's a lot of opportunity where it doesn't, it's more nervous to take that confidence. Or if you're younger in the industry and you end up in a setting that is much more male dominated, that the level of confidence to be like, I can step up and do this, can possibly be challenged. And so to remember and recognize, like, no, it doesn't have to be, right? You don't have to be a developer to have that confidence. You should, just the benefits of having a level of confidence in what you can do and what you're bringing to the table stretches across all the aspects of the industry as well. And so,
before we go, I'm curious if there are any ways that people can contact you, if there are any projects, anything you'd like to ask about. Are you looking to hire anybody? Are you looking for capital? Are you looking for partners on a new project? Anything like that?
Our work is available. You can find out more about our company and our firm on the website, www.barrientosRyan. And I'm sure that you can put that in the podcast notes so that people know how to spell that. But right now, no, I mean, the amazing part is that most of my work is often just word of mouth. And so if people have needs, they're welcome to reach out and find me. And part of what I'm really looking to do at this point is sort of spread the knowledge and expertise across, from an advisory standpoint, across more projects than less, if that's possible, right? Which means a little less time with individual projects, but more time across the board, being able to help share that expertise. So
thank you. Another option for us to work together. So thank you.
Well, on that, I think we've talked about so many things today. Kristin, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to hear your story, hear about the way you develop, why you develop, where you're developing, and how you're bringing together community. But it's time to wrap on this episode of Breaking Ceilings, Breaking Ground. Thank you so much for being with us, Kristin. We look forward to staying connected as the podcast launches, as this episode gets published. We hope all of you listening found today's conversation as inspiring and empowering as Molly and I did. I'm sure if you love this episode, make sure to subscribe to Breaking Ceilings, Breaking Ground, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know a woman in real estate development whose story should be shared, please reach out through our website, www.breakingceilingsbreakingground.com. We'd love to feature her. Don't forget to leave us a review and share this podcast with your network. We can continue to amplify the voices of women shaping the future of real estate, just like Kristin Ryan. Until next time, keep breaking ceilings and breaking ground.
Thank you, Molly and Jill. Thank you for pulling this together. It's such valuable work.
Thank you so
for
much.
joining us today.